It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, a lot going on, and some good stuff. Look, the reality, good stuff. Almost whatever the state of the state was, what that address was last night. Really, not really a State of the Union address, but a State of the State, kind of an update. Hey, this is what we're doing. I think good stuff. I couldn't help but go back and think, and I was remembering when Biden won South Carolina. This was one of those things where, I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly happy. Biden was down on my list. He was fourth, probably fifth-ish. Fourth, fifth, he was in that spot. Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, they were at the top. Because I'll be honest, I thought of a second Obama term as something I didn't really want. I know we were in a moment, needed massive change. We needed vision. We needed change. And I remember all of the folks on the left. And look, when Biden won, I'm like, okay, Biden's not bad. He's not terrible. He's going to be a good labor guy. I said from the beginning, going to be a good guy for unions, going to be a good guy helping get, jobs and that stuff, going to be good on that. Maybe not as progressive on, Medicare for all, maybe not as progressive on some of the tax issues, maybe not as far as I would like to go. And it turns out that the American voter was a little bit smarter than everybody else and chose Joe Biden. But I remember at the time, the left, crying in their almond milk, just beside themselves. Wasn't going to be progressive enough, wasn't going to do anything, was going to be, Obama 2.0 is what we kept hearing. Last night, lots of people pleasantly surprised. And, as I sat back and I really I digested what the president had to say in the speech last night, I keep coming back to he's the right guy for the moment. I said before the election, I think in the run up to that election, had Bernie Sanders been the nominee, had Elizabeth Warren been the nominee, they would have gotten beaten, and I believe that. I think Biden was the right bit of that calming influence that the nation needs. Somebody who's just going to show up, do the job, not cause chaos, not do a bunch to stir the nest, just do the job. And what we saw out of that speech was doing the job. Came out and said, "This is my agenda." And the right has all day been losing their mind about the radical socialist agenda and all of the box checking that did happen in the speech. But, just radical agenda. And, today, the folks on the left, who weren't thrilled with him, pretty happy. And some of the headlines that have come out, the Politico, the headline read there, Biden just gave the most ideological, ambitious speech of any Democratic president in generations. NPR had blared their headline, big government is back. Axios even went on to say Biden bets big. And these are things I'm going to push back on the big government is back thing. I'm going to go with the helpful government is back. A government that is a partner is back. Because I've said I don't care big, small, medium. The size is subjective. I want effective government. I want government that works. I want a government that's going to do for we the working people that for which we are incapable of doing singularly, like pave our roads and our bridges and rebuild our infrastructure, revitalize our inner cities, give kids opportunities through education and get health care to everyone. Those things that comes back to the family values. Now, what's interesting, and I've had a number of these conversations today about what the right has been able to take control of, and family values has been one of those things. The Republicans love to tell you how much they love the children. Oh, they love the children. And they love families, and they love grandma and apple pie, and they are just Americana. Yet their policies have been horrible. Horrible for workers, horrible for families. And I've been saying for a while, we need a reset. And kind of what I view Biden's speech last night as is kind of that reset. Now, understand, the right is losing their ever-loving freaking minds. Because this is socialism. If you saw Tim Scott's speech, it was all about, oh, this is socialism, this is big government, this is Washington getting involved in your life. And you go, did I miss that in the speech? This was about, as I watched it, now look, I'll give you the assessment I gave right after the speech was, I wish it was half as long. I wish he would have stuck to the family values, to the economic stuff, and not gotten into the laundry list that everyone seems you got to tick a box off to get through. Have that. We're going to base on families. We're going to move forward from here. We're going to rebuild the economy. We're going to rebuild jobs. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure. And now here's your action. Go out and do it. Go out and make me push this agenda through. Show everyone that the American people want this agenda. Because what it was a massive reset. It was a reset to where, and I've been talking about this for almost every day of the 16 years I've been doing this program. This was a reset to what my grandparents' generation grew up believing in. Kind of what his generation, his parents' generation grew up with. The idea that you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead. The fact that maybe one income can support a family. And that you help those families achieve that American dream of owning your own home and building for retirement and having health security, sending that kid off to college and not having them loaded with a lifetime of debt. I mean, that kind of, that belief, again, I keep saying it, that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead, and having a framework and an infrastructure in place to help people move through that. Government is a partner. The right never talks about how much power government has over our lives with corporate America in charge. We never hear how much they pander to the corporations. But when we start talking about, workers having rights to join and form unions, bridge too far. We start talking about kids having universal pre-K or being able to get an associate's degree beyond high school and having that be paid for as part of their education. Oh, heads blowing up, heads exploding, socialism. Joe Biden in the speech said this is a once-in-a-generation investment in America. I would say this is a once in a couple of generations. The last major kind of investment like this that we saw was during the Eisenhower years, when they built the highway system. When they built the interstate highway system, we're now going to rebuild the interstate highway system. We're going to build the information superhighway system. We're going to build the future while bringing up the things that we need from the past, our roads, our bridges, our waterways, our public sewers, our public water. Key being public. And I keep coming back to, we've got to undo the last 40 years of damage done by conservative ideology. It's got to be set aside. We've tried it. It's failed. We've tried handing things over to corporate America. It's failed. We've tried again and again, and it's failed. Now you have Joe Biden, who came out and said the middle class was built the country, and unions built the middle class. I absolutely 110% agree with that. 110% agree. He said that this is going to be the biggest increase in non-defense spending, non-defense research, and development on record. This is going to be a massive amount of funding going into our nation. And it's what we need. It's the moment that we need it right now. I love the fact that he says investments in the American Jobs Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. I absolutely agree with that, without question. We need to be doing these things. He says no one who's working 40 hours should live below the poverty line. Absolutely, positively agree with that. There are things that we need to be doing, investments that we need to be making, that are going to rebuild the working class of this country and give families the opportunity to be able to live that dream, to raise their children in good, safe neighborhoods, good schools, and not have the kind of struggles that have happened over the last 20 years. This is an opportunity. Now, you saw the conservative, response. Tim Scott gave his response, which was, very predictable. It's socialism. It's Washington. It's big government. We want bipartisan support. We want, all this other stuff. And it's one of those things that, in being very frustrated and listening to conservatives and being very frustrated in hearing the rhetoric, this is an opportunity to remake America. And here's the thing that's important. There was a snap poll done right after the speech. 85% of the people who responded to the snap poll agreed, approved, and said, look, these are policies we want. These are family values policies. This is how we move the... Now, 85%, understand. 85%. Now, Biden's approval rating is somewhere 50s, 60 top. So that's telling me there's some Republicans out there who are going, I like what I heard. Our families do need help. Our communities do need help. We do need to rebuild things. We do need jobs. And this is where my focus has been all along. And I've been saying this to Democrats for, a couple of decades now. Your meat and potatoes, your bread and butter, whatever you want to throw at it, is jobs. And in his speech, he said the word job 46 times. So if you got anything from this, what you got was he's going to create jobs. We're going to fund infrastructure projects because it's going to create those jobs, and those jobs are going to be good union jobs, and those good union jobs are going to have a trickle-down effect, and that a reverberation effect through the economy, and people are going to do better. Lives will get better. Very simple to me. It is a right direction. And look, the more of us that get on board with this, the more that Republicans are going to have to come along. And I look at the fact that today, the Senate, the 50-50 Senate, the divided 50-50 Senate, passed a $35 billion bill to shore up states' water infrastructure. 89-2. You don't ever see an 89-2 vote in the Senate. So while Tim Scott last night was saying, "Oh well, we Joe Biden's dividing us," well, they just moved a piece of legislation called the Drinking Water and Water Waste Infrastructure Act. Two Republicans, Mike Lee and of course Ted Cruz, voted against it. I have no idea why. This is going to make sure that we have access to clean drinking water. This is going to make sure that we have safe water systems, and it's going to help. It's going to help foster economic growth. Going to get those jobs back. We're going to connect communities. These are the things we can and we should be doing. And I'm glad to see that Joe Biden is leading us in that direction. Now, there are going to be some things we don't agree on. And this is where Tim Scott wanted to paint the Democrats are, they just want Washington in your life. No. We want to make sure that families have opportunities. We want to make sure that this generation has the opportunities my grandparents' generation had. That idea that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get ahead. I keep coming back to that. And that if the private sector refuses to create enough jobs or won't create enough jobs or even can't create enough jobs, that the public sector will do that. If the private sector doesn't see that waterways are important or putting electricity into your home or broadband internet access into your community, if corporations don't see that they can do it or want to do it, we do it for ourselves. And this is kind of what I took from Biden's speech last night. He just laid out in a matter-of-fact way, this is it. This is kind of a reset. And while the right is screaming that it's radical, this is who we were. The vision that he's laid out is who we were. When a lot of people want to hearken back to when America was great. The Trump folks were saying, we're going to make America great again. Well, when was that? Well, then. The exact things that Biden is talking about is when they point to the era that was great. Where a single wage earner could support a family. Where you had health security. You had retirement security. You had investments into your community. Educational opportunities. I think that's what people want. That's what people need. And to have a government that's saying that we're going to help provide that is a good thing. Now, there are some folks out there who are just plain insane. And, it's not surprising that they are plain insane. I look at this J.D. Vance who saw the universal pre-K thing and I guess kind of lost his mind a little bit. When he tweeted out that universal daycare is class war against normal people. I'm going, really? Class war against normal people? The fact that we want to make sure that kids have access to good quality daycare and families can figure out how to navigate. That rises to your definition of class war? We have very different definitions. Because what's happened over the last 40 years is a class war against the working class. And the wealthy have been winning. Biden, I think, last night said, that's over. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day 8,000 UAW workers at the Chalmers plant in Milwaukee voted overwhelmingly to walk off the job. Close to 12,000 production and maintenance workers were on strike across the country. Workers rode the post-war strike wave as whole industries moved to peacetime reconversion. Historian Eric Slocum notes that UAW Local 248 had a historically militant left-wing leadership, was known for its support to housing desegregation campaigns in the city, and was a central driving force of Milwaukee's CIO Council. They had built a strong shop steward and grievance structure at Chalmers and were sure victory was certain. Local President Robert Busey insisted wage increases were not at issue, but rather unresolved issues remained to be settled now that the war was finally over. Key points of contention were the company's demands to eliminate maintenance of membership agreements that guaranteed the closed shop and union dues. The company also wanted to stop paying stewards for the time involved in grievance procedures. The Chalmers strike was a harbinger of things to come. Historian Martin Halpern states that the company officials played a significant role in the crafting of Taft-Hartley legislation as the strike unfolded. Alice Chalmers was on a union-busting campaign and made no small effort to red-bait union leaders for months in local newspapers. By the fall, workers at the smaller plants had returned to work, but the Milwaukee local stood firm. Area CIO workers joined picket lines in support, only to be brutalized and arrested. The House Un-American Activities Committee arrived in town to investigate the strike, and the company instigated a vigorous back-to-work campaign. After 11 months, the strike was called off with no contract and 91 union leaders fired.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So here we are, 100 days into the Biden administration, and the big speech last night. A bold vision for the future. Very happy to see what came out of it. And as I said earlier, you had a whole bunch of folks who were, when Biden won South Carolina, they were losing their mind that, maybe he wasn't going to be enough. They couldn't put the almond milk down fast enough, that he wasn't going to rise to the occasion. And I think last night, I think he did a really good job. I think it was a little long. I would have cut it earlier, but I still think a bold vision for the future, and in a good way. I'm looking forward to the discussions and the debates moving forward. Here to share some thoughts on the first 100 days, maybe a little bit about the big speech. I've asked Jesse Lee to come talk with us. Jesse's the Vice President of Communications there at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. CAP is their website, Center for AmericanProgress.org, their website. Check them out on Twitter, Cap Action. Jesse, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's start with the big speech last night. Grade, thoughts? What'd you think last night?
Sure. So, I kind of pivoting off your kind of intro there. I worked in the Obama administration for 8 years, and I didn't interact with Biden that much directly, but when I did, it was kind of some intensive periods, and he said stuff to me that makes what he's doing now less surprising to me. He had more of a fighting instinct than I think a lot of people knew about him, and I think that's kind of come through. I think he realized that there was an opportunity here that the middle class and working people have been left behind for decades. And if he seizes the moment, he can rectify a lot of what's been wrong with the country and the economy for all these years. Yep. And I think, the agenda he laid out in that speech last night was, that's what you do. That's what the economy should look like. And, you're talking about an economy that produces, millions of jobs and huge kind of what I would describe as kind of progressive economic growth. And that's economic growth that doesn't just benefit, the stock market and CEOs, but benefits everybody. And that's what we haven't seen in this country, right?
Absolutely.
Even when you've had economic growth, it's all just going into, the top 1%'s pockets. And this is a formula where, and I think, it's funny, when I started thinking about this a month or two ago, I kind of, recoiled from the idea of, well, we shouldn't talk about economic growth. That's like a Republican thing, right? And that's a problem that I think we as progressives think that way. And it's a problem that the country thinks that way, and you see this in polling, going on where, people will say the Democrats are looking out for people like me, but Republicans are better on the economy in some abstract term, or economic growth as some abstract way. And I think Biden's got a unique opportunity here to kind of seize both of those mantles and say, actually, we could do both.
No, I'm right there with you. We've got to reclaim what our vision of the economy is and answer that question. What is an economy for? Is it for simply more profit for the wealthy and more for the big corporations? Or is it for us to support our families and attain that American dream of, whatever yours is, but working hard, playing by the rules and get ahead, the kind of thing that I grew up believing was possible, but sadly not. And Democrats have ceded that to Republicans. And the thing is Republicans have done such a horrible job with the economy for average working people that it should be where we fight those battles. I was not a huge Bill Clinton fan. I'll be the first to admit it. Anybody who listens to the show knows that I've got problems with him. But the one place he was right, and it was Carville's line, it's the economy, stupid.
Right, exactly. And, the reason he left office with, 65, 7% approval, actually, like, it wasn't just that he's looking out for you. It was economic growth. It was the economy, and I think Democrats have, very understandably latched on to this idea of like, well, the pie has to be divvied up fairly. And that's absolutely true. But we should be saying, we need a bigger pie. This is how you do it. And then we also need to divvy it up fairly.
Now,
and
see the first part, you went to the Bush line. We need to make the pie bigger, which, okay, I do. But if we're going to divvy it up in much the same way we were, or my slice gets smaller of the bigger pie, we still have the same problem. And this is where I think Biden last night did a great job laying out his vision for what this next infrastructure bill and what the future of the economy looks like. And where I took some heat last night, I said, I thought it was too long. I thought he should have stuck to that economic stuff. We're going to get people the ability to support their families. We're going to revitalize the economy. We're going to rebuild the country. And he should have had a call to action. Let's get this done. This is the moment. It should have been that kind of thing instead of, then he went into like speechwriters. They got to tick off all the boxes to get to the end of the speech. Too much. Stick to that one thing. Get that. That's what we should have been hammering on all day today.
Well, I'll tell you, I didn't. I had a kind of similar reaction to you at first, and then one of the first things I read the next morning was they said the word jobs 40 times,
43 times,
and that says to me that maybe I was a little kind of too inside the bubble, and like, because I suspect if you're somebody just out there that's kind of just tuning in and you don't really know what Biden's agenda is. And with that, polling has shown that a lot, even though he gets very favorable marks on job performance and on his agenda and on the bills he's passed or proposed. Actually, people don't know a lot of details. But if they tune in to, an hour-long plus speech and they hear the word jobs 40 times, they're probably going to know what he's talking about. You know what I mean? Even if he talks about some other stuff too.
No, you're right. And that's where the message has to be constantly. And we got to get away from, at least in my view, you're going to move policies that are going to be good for everybody. We're going to move policies for all the groups that need things done. But at the end of the day, if we're going to unite the country, if we're going to come back to somewhere near the same bulb field, it's going to come back to jobs and the economy. If you're going to reach out to those working class voters who voted for Trump, it comes back to those jobs, revitalizing communities that lost factories. It's about dealing with making people's lives better. The old Reagan line, you're better off than you were 4 years ago. That's got to be the question that comes up every election. Did you make people's lives better?
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think, this idea of the economy being rigged against working people, I think in this case also rigged against, just families that have two parents that have to work to make a middle-class living or even make a working-class living, being rigged against construction workers and, et cetera, et cetera. What we're talking about is an agenda to fix a lot of that finally. And I mean, that's what Trump ran on, and he ran on it successfully. Now, I'm not one to say, Trump got elected with the worst approval ratings of any winning president in, polling history. So I'm not one to be like, well, he was a genius, but he tapped into something there. Like,
he stole the right things.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it is a fact that the government has gradually, incrementally, just yard by yard been kind of rigged against working people. And all this stuff that Biden proposed, stuff that should have been, we should have done one of these things every 2 years for the last 30 years. And we didn't,
Here's the thing, Jesse, this is what I've been screaming about for the last 16 years doing this program. that this is the kind of economic agenda that Democrats need to be going on. It's the reason I voted for Barack Obama. Met him twice, shook his hand twice. Twice he told me we were going to get something better than the Employee Free Choice Act. We were going to revitalize the labor movement. And sadly, zip. And the average everyday working person, that's something that they remember. To me, that was the message. You got to help. Joe and Jane Sixpack. When that happens, good things happen for Democrats.
I'll say, and I'll admit, I was there for all 8 years of Obama. I have got some defensiveness ingrained in me. I will say, and I hope people don't take this in a bad way, but I think a lot of what you heard in Biden's speech last night is stuff that, Obama proposed. I think it was amped up. It was amped up in scale. But, Obama just had so much of his first term, his first 2 years especially, sucked into, the financial collapse, and you got to bail the banks out because otherwise there's going to be another 5 million jobs lost. And there's the auto bailout, which ended up being really popular, but was really unpopular at the time. And he got the Recovery Act, which was, actually really big at the time. It looks small now, but it was pretty big at the time. But he proposed a lot of this stuff, and I think he became a lot more progressive as the years went on. But also the American people just became a lot more progressive. And, the truth of the matter is even Trump ran on, huge infrastructure packages. And not to mention, Medicare negotiating the lower drug prices, not to mention, the wealthy paying more taxes. And of course, he
ran on the labor agenda. He stole labor's agenda, trade, jobs, infrastructure. That's what labor was talking about. And sadly, this is, for me, the speech. Actually, the first 100 days of Biden have been all about reaffirming the Democratic Party's commitment to the labor movement. And it's something that I've been waiting for a very long time. As I said, I met Obama a couple of times. I thought he was going to be the guy who was going to be that champion. We didn't get there. I think Biden is going to move us in that direction. In fact, day one, Joe Biden did more for labor, I think, than any president in my lifetime by firing Peter Robb and his assistant at the NLRB. We can debate that, but that was still a huge action in the favor of the labor movement.
No. I mean, listen, you can listen to Biden, any Biden speech any day, and he'll just drop in there. The middle class built this economy, and the unions built the middle class. It almost seemed like, well, where did that come from? But he's saying it over and over again because he cares about it. He means it. You know what I mean? It sounds almost out of place sometimes when he says it, but he's trying to make it so that this is in place. This is something that gets in people's heads.
But here's the thing, and this is where some of my left friends who were freaked out when he won South Carolina, and he wasn't going to be viewed as progressive as Bernie or Elizabeth or any of the other ones. I said, look, he's a labor guy. This is who he is. I think he's resetting the Democratic Party to where they were when he was a young man. This isn't radical. This is where my grandparents' generation were. This is not radical talk that he's doing. This is what 2 generations ago the Democratic Party stood for.
Yeah, I mean, no, literally, not even figuratively, but literally in the Joe Biden literally sense. Literally, a lot of these proposals were on the table 2, 3, 4 decades ago. Universal child care was on the table back then. And, there was a kind of, big setback around Reagan, I think, a shell shock that, I think was partly the result of successful kind of mythologizing from Republicans, right? But, it shell-shocked Democrats into reverting, the whole, the era of big government is over, blah, 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 and now, I'm reading the tip sheets and, Politico and whatever. Well, the era of big government is back. It's like, I don't know, man, is that child tax credit giving people with kids a little more money so that they can get childcare. Is that big government? I guess if you say so, it's a tax credit. That doesn't sound, sound dystopian to me.
No, we can debate the size of government. I have people like, well, big government. Explain what big government is. It's subjective to me. I don't want big government. I don't want small government. I don't want medium-sized government. You know what I want? effective government. I want government that's going to make sure that things get done. I want the potholes filled. I want the bridges not collapsing. I want our kids getting good education. I want people to have health care. I want homeless people to find homes. And I want our government to be a hand in that. I view our government as not just things that do for us. I see it as the instrument that we use collectively to do the things that we can't do individually, like pave a road, like build a bridge, like have a school system.
Hey, listen, half of our government is dedicated to supporting businesses. And I mean, there's ways in which that's fair. Supporting American business is good. Like, you want them to succeed. You want to, outcompete the competition. But like, nobody says, well, that's big government when you start helping American businesses. But as soon as you try to help an American worker, it's like, oh, wow, what kind of socialism big government is this?
Yeah.
It's like, well, what are you talking about?
So let me ask you last line of question, because the next 100 days are obviously going to be the hardest one. They usually get a honeymoon. I think today's officially the honeymoon over, if he ever had one. Republicans weren't going to ever come along. We've known that. They've been as obstructive as they were ever going to be. They're just trying to frame it a little differently, especially if you listen to Tim Scott last night. What do you see the next 100 days being?
I think it's there's a lot of discussion about this in the kind of progressive movement and Democratic Party, and I think even inside the White House. But my feeling is Biden needs to keep up the kind of tone that he had in that speech, and it needs to be about aspiration, where we can have a booming economy that works for everybody. And the kind of economy that's been rigged against you all these years, we can fix it. And this is how you do it. And you need to get these senators to, all this discussion about how do you appeal to Joe Manchin and, Sinema and all this. Well, you appeal to them by saying, you can do something great. You can make life great for your constituents for decades. And, it doesn't have to be like, well, you got to vote for it because if you don't, then this thing happens. Like, do something great. You know what I mean? And I think, Biden has been riding that tone so far and it's worked well for him. And he's got to keep finding ways to lift that up. And I think, he's not, the world's greatest orator ever, but he's not the worst.
He's not Clinton or Obama. You're right. But he's not George W. Bush either.
No, he's no Obama, but I'll tell you, he gives the best eulogy of anybody in the world, as far as I'm concerned. You listen to the speech last night, and it doesn't sound like he's reading a policy white paper. He's saying things to you that in a way that you can understand.
Yep, he's Uncle Joe.
Yeah, but he needs to kind of lean into the fact that, like, listen, I don't want to say it. I don't think he should say this, but we can make America great again, where we have a progressive, booming economy that helps everybody.
There you go.
And, like I say, I never use that phrase ever, but there is a way where the idea that we have an economy that's booming and it actually helps everybody. And, somebody can get the care they need for their kid or their aging parent. And, a construction worker can get to work rebuilding our roads and our bridges and our infrastructure in a way that doesn't burn the planet down through climate change. These are things that are like the kind of things that are people look back at American history, even over the last 100 years, and say, man, wasn't that amazing?
Yep, and that's where I'd like to see us go. I like your idea of it being as aspirational. But Jesse, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts.
All right. It's always a pleasure.
Good stuff. Jesse Lee, the Vice President of Communications there at the Center for American Progress. Make sure you check out their website, americanprogress.org. A quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people and the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
In the Coeur d'Alene district, the mining companies fought against unionization. They hired Pinkerton detectives to infiltrate union meetings and fire those who dared to hold a union card. In 1893, the Western Federation of Miners was founded and became a major organizing union in the region. Bunker Hill remained non-union, drawing the ire of workers in the surrounding mines. miners. A group of miners took over a train and loaded it with dynamite. The Western Federation of Miners paper, the Idaho State Tribune, described what happened next, writing, quote, "A detachment of Union miners armed with Winchester rifles was dispatched to the mountainside beyond the mill, and the work of placing under the mill the 3,000 pounds of dynamite taken from the magazine of the Frisco mine at Gem was commenced. At no time did the demonstration assume the appearance or the attitude of a disorganized mob. All of the details were managed with the discipline and
Rick
precision
Smith.
of a perfectly trained military organization. The response was swift and brutal. Federal troops were called in. Along with gun-toting thugs hired by the company, they arrested every man they could find, not just miners. Even a doctor and a postmaster were swept up in the arrests. More than 1,000 men were arrested. They were held in a makeshift bullpen made from a converted barn. Some were held as long as a year without any formal charges filed until the unionization effort was crushed. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember going back to the Amazon organizing campaign down in Bessemer, Alabama. One of the sources we talked an awful lot about was this source, More Perfect Union, that done some really outstanding reporting. And it's the kind of reporting that we need more of to talk about working class issues, to talk about worker organizing, and talk about the things that, well, the mainstream media didn't really want to talk about. But, you know, that Amazon campaign was, like I said in the past, the most well covered of my lifetime. And I think the folks at More Perfect Union were a part of the reason of that. That's why I've asked Max Berger to come talk with us. He's the editorial director there at More Perfect Union. You can check out their website, perfectunion.us, but more importantly, check out their Twitter at moreperfectus. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I got to tell you, your Amazon coverage I thought was terrific. I thought it was important, and I thought you guys are kind of a driver in getting some of the early stuff out to get some attention.
Yeah, we were the first folks on the ground to be able to do consistent video, and Kim Kelly, as I'm sure you know, fantastic labor reporter. We were really excited to get a chance to work with her, and you know, being on the ground is just a different kind of you know, you're able to build up relationships with folks, you know, earn trust of the organizers. And so the folks on the ground, I think, really came to saw us as part of the campaign, which is exactly what we, you know, want to be for labor organizers and for folks who are leading these campaigns. And as you said, you know, I think it was an opportunity for us to do a lot of political education for folks, right? Because I think those of us who have been part of labor, you know, worked in labor, our union members really understand how these elections go, how tilted the field is against the union, the kind of pressure that employers are able to put on workers, and you know, even within the scope of the law, right? Like, forget about all the things that they do that go beyond what's legal, and just write that off as, you know, one of the kind of costs of doing business. So, you know, I think that was one of the things for me that was most exciting, because Amazon is such a known entity, you know, because people pay attention to what they do, because they're such a huge part of the economy, you know, gave us an opportunity to really lift up this fight that, you know, was a historic fight for labor, but also that, you know, I think for people who don't know a lot about labor, it was an opportunity to really learn how these campaigns work.
No, and you guys did, I thought, a really good job of it. And it's one of these things that, you know, Amazon spent something like $200 million to put down that campaign. And I think a lot of people got to see what happens in these union busting campaigns. And as you've said, you know, they did all the things that were actually legal. The captive audience meetings, the constant harassment with, you know, flyers posted in bathroom stalls, changing the lights, you know, all kinds of things they got away with on the up and up. And then there's the, you know, the outward firing of people, the
Right.
veiled threats and intimidation, and all of the other stuff that I hope on May 7th we're gonna get some insight into all of the other things that they pulled.
Yeah, I would be really shocked if that didn't go our way because it seemed at certain points like they were breaking the law on purpose in order to kind of bait the union into potentially trying to delay the election because I think at some points they were scared. Like the move that they pulled with the mailbox was just such a blatant violation of law that, they got a direct ruling from the NLRB telling them, no, don't do this. And then they went ahead and did it anyway. So, it's hard to see how that doesn't violate the law. But it's crazy, and I'm sure you know this better than anybody, but with these repeat offenders, there's really been there's so little enforcement. One of the saddest things I found in my work on the campaign was, in I think it was 2014, there was a campaign down, I believe in Kentucky, where they were found to have broken the law in suppressing the union. And the penalty for them was to just post
a notice.
Post a notice, yeah. And the same thing happened in Staten Island, or in Long Island, right, with when they were found to have.
No, that's the penalty, Max. That's always been the penalty. A little slap on the wrist. Don't do it again. Now you have to post a notice and say you're sorry.
Yeah,
and that's why we've always needed comprehensive labor law reform. It's because it's my view, if you get caught doing that, immediately we're imposing the union on you, and we're imposing a contract on you for a 2-year period, and then you can negotiate out of that. There's got to be real penalties for breaking the law the way they get away with.
Absolutely, and I think I think there also needs to be real penalties for the managers, so that it's not just a corporate expense. If you as an individual recognize that you're going to get hit with real, criminal or civil liabilities, you're gonna approach that situation very differently. And I think people just understand we're allowed to get away with whatever we want.
Yeah. So in your coverage of doing this, you've been doing this a long time. What was the most egregious story you guys came across? I mean, there were some pretty good ones. I mean, I had one person tell me that they actually hired felons to come in and wear sandwich boards to walk around, and I'm going, that's kind of creative, I guess. But yeah. Anything that caught your attention?
This got some coverage, but the extent to which that, especially in a small town like Bessemer that, needs resources, needs funds, they're just able to boss around the local authorities, right? I mean, so they changed the traffic light. That obviously got a decent amount of coverage. The other thing that didn't get as much coverage was they basically just bought out the entire police department. So they had the entire police department doing surveillance, doing security in their, marked, their public police cars. There was a man who was arrested because something with his badge didn't work, but he was also known to be one of the kind of leading labor, union supporters in the campaign. So, I think what ended up happening is a lot of folks came to see, okay, it's not just this gigantic, the world's largest corporation, world's richest man that we're up against, but it's also our local police and our mayor and, even the traffic, the traffic system is against us. So I think that the level of intimidation that creates is pretty intense.
See, and I look at that and I go back to, to my being just defiant outwardly most of the time anyway. That kind of behavior would have made me vote, even if I was on the fence or I was a no at one point. Seeing that happen and the kind of power that this company has would have made me go, no, I got to vote for this because someone's got to knock these folks down a notch.
Oh, absolutely. But, I think they played it really well with the mailbox because they made people think that they were tracking whether they voted. So because the mailbox was right outside and they were constantly texting people, hey, drop off your ballot, drop off your ballot, drop off your ballot. That mailbox wasn't an official, USPS sanctioned NLRB supervised drop location. So for all the workers knew, Amazon was checking the ballots to see who had voted, like there was no way that.
Or how they had voted. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that the level of fear, especially, I think the one thing that's maybe a little bit different about an Amazon than the way that this has been working for the last 40 years is that surveillance dimension, right? Because I'm sure you heard about this in other parts of when you were covering Amazon, but the way that the time off task works, right? Like they have, tracking systems that track to the second what folks are doing on the job, right? Your Amazon Echo at home, or Alexa, whatever, is listening to you and is telling Amazon stuff about you. So, and that is everywhere. It's the web of surveillance that they're able to impose on workers is really intense. And you know, Amazon has been willing to really go there. They hired the Pinkertons, like the Pinkertons in Europe. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So it's like, if you're an Amazon worker in Bessemer, you got to ask yourself, hey, what are they willing to do? It seems like basically anything. So
yeah, they got the gun thugs of old, and not only are they in the Pinkerton uniforms, they're in the town squad cars. It's amazing. But this is, for me, where I think in a moment, maybe you'll agree, that I think people are starting to pull their head up and go, this is too much power. These companies have too much, which is why I think what you do is important, because, I talk about all the time when I was a kid, and this is going back into the 70s, when I was a kid delivering the Cleveland Press, they had a labor page. They had a labor reporter he covered the labor beat. So when this company got a good contract, there was a story about it. We've wiped those labor pages clean from every newspaper, but there's a business page there, which is why, again, I come back to what you guys do at More Perfect Union as kind of filling that void that had been there at one point, that got working people thinking about issues in the frame of a working class kind of mindset. Or you think I'm going too far?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think we're in this incredible, very bizarre moment where there is, I think, more opportunity to organize working class people and to actually win unions than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Like if you look at even just the polls on this stuff is really remarkable. Unions are at the highest favorability that they've been in 35, 40 years. People's, degree of trust towards big corporations is very low. And the number of people who say, yeah, I want to join a union is higher than it's been in 20 years. So it's very clear, I think, to folks right now how the system is set up to make that very difficult. And I think a big part of what I hope that we can do is sort of demystify for people what actually goes into building a union. You want to build a union, you want to start a campaign in your workplace. How the heck do you do that? Why is it that this is so difficult? Why has it become that so few American workers are represented by unions? When I feel like there's this kind of broad historical memory that everyone has that was not always the case, that there was a time where labor was strong, where the workers actually had a say in how the economy was run. And, I think people have a sense that has gone missing and they don't totally understand why. And so I think that's part of the story that we want to tell, is give people a sense of how did that happen? What do we do about it? Where do we go from here? And I do think, I don't want to jinx it, but I do think that the next couple of years are going to see a tremendous upsurge of labor activity.
Potentially, I think there's going to be potentially a lot of activity. With the current laws that we have now, I'm not. Look, I'll be honest. I didn't think the Amazon workers in Bessemer had a snowball's chance of ever winning that election. And I was
over there. It's crazy. That's the biggest part, is that it's near 100% turnover. So
right. Being in Alabama, being the labor laws that we have, I saw no chance. But to be honest, the fact that they fought the good fight, the fact that we saw open and firsthand the kind of abuses, and that some people are now paying attention, I do think you're right. We're going to see more activity, but without major labor law reform, I fear we see the same movie over and over again, which is why I'm hopeful that Biden is able to get the PRO Act pushed through. And I don't think the PRO Act is enough. I want a full repeal of Taft-Hartley would be my choice, but the PRO Act is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. It would be huge. But I think even then, right, like whether you're talking about the amount of mobilization that's going to go into the PRO Act, if it becomes, if the filibuster happens and that becomes a real possibility, or you're talking about a world in which it doesn't happen and there are relatively tight labor markets relative to what we've seen because they're trying to run the economy hot, and you have a ostensibly pro-union president. And I think we can't understate the generational dimension of this. where, I'm 35. I think people who are my age or younger are more militant than you would believe. I don't know if you have folks like that on the show often, but the pro-union sentiment, the pro-working class sentiment, the pro-collective action sentiment amongst young people is just off the charts. And so I think,
no, I agree with that. And I think a lot of it has to do is they watch their parents suffer and struggle. They watched them lose their jobs. They watched them lose their retirement because corporate America stole it from them. They watched all of the abuses, which is why I do understand why you see a lot of young people saying, we want to be socialists. I'm not a socialist, but I do understand it because they watched what capitalism did to their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that unlike, socialists of yore, sometimes socialists don't always find themselves to be most friendly with the labor movement. I think one thing that I have found very heartening about a lot of young leftists today is how much they care about the future of the labor movement and how much they'd like to be involved in it, and I think one of the things that's most exciting to me right now is the role that DSA has been playing in this PRO-ACT campaign. Like they have really put their shoulder into it and they're trying to make it happen. And they understand that if they're not out there with rank and file folks, they're just posting all day.
Yep.
That's not going to get us anywhere. And so I think, I am hopeful. I think it's going to be a rough ride because the PRO-ACT, as you said, is hardly enough on its own. And gosh, I don't know about our chances with that. I think it's going to be a battle. If we get to the point where it looks like it may actually pass, I think the level of mobilization we're going to see from business is going to just blow people away. I don't think that means that we're going to lose. I think that we got a decent shot, but if we get rid of the filibuster, which is a whole nother.
And all this all of this comes back to information. It all comes back to what you're consuming and what information you're getting and the kind of reporting that's out there. And I look at the work that you guys do as very important as part of this, which is why, I had to get you to come on and talk about what you do, point people in your direction. I hope people will check out the website, perfectunion.us. We'll get links out there. Also, More Perfect US on Twitter. You can follow all that stuff. Easy digestible videos and some really good stuff that I think is important.
Thanks a lot, man. Yeah, we're also big fans of yours, and anything we can do to help out, just let us know.
By all means, whenever you guys got something, let me know. Last question: is there something you're paying attention to now? Obviously, the Amazon stuff is big. They got the May 7th hearing coming up. Anything else that we should be paying attention to?
The other thing we were really excited about was Maine, and that just happened. So I don't know what our next big fight is going to be. We were also relatively involved with Collectivo, which is a big coffee company in Chicago. So we'll be seeing what happens there in the next couple of weeks.
And up in Maine, the nurses up in Maine, they won their election.
Yep, huge deal.
Well,
it was 1,900 members, so pretty big unit.
I'm sure we'll hear more of that. But by all means, please come back again.
All right, thanks a lot.
Good stuff, Max Berger. Make sure you check out the work that he does there at More Perfect Union, moreperfectunion.us, the website. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you pay attention to the Amazon stuff? Did you see the videos that they put out? I thought they did really good work. And like I said, when I was a kid, every newspapers had labor pages where you could go and read about workers' stories. Those are long, long gone. In fact, I think the last labor reporter in the country was Stephen Greenhouse over at the New York Times, and they let him go several years back. But you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. When you stand up for civil rights and workers' rights, you never know how far the struggle may travel. This was the case on this day in labor history. The year was 1963. West Indian immigrants in Bristol, England, held a press conference to announce a boycott of the city buses. They were inspired by the bus boycotts led by Dr. Martin Luther King in Montgomery, Alabama. The Bristol Omnibus Company would not hire West Indian or black drivers. While the company would hire non-white workers for the garage, a color barrier stood between the West Indian workers and the more lucrative driving jobs. Even though the company had a driver shortage, they would take only white applicants. In 1962, 4 Jamaican men had founded the West Indian Development Council. The council aimed to address the unemployment and housing discrimination and threats of violence that West Indians faced every day. They were inspired by what they saw unfolding in the civil rights movement in the United States. They decided to take action. Some 7,000 West Indians in Bristol answered the call to boycott the buses. The bus company management blamed the drivers' union for the policy of discrimination. Indeed, some individual bus drivers spoke out that they did not want to work with West Indian people, but the union leadership adamantly denied they wanted the color barrier. The boycott wore on for 4 months, and in the end, finally, the color bar was lifted. That September, a Sikh named Ragbar Singh became the first non-white driver. The flame for justice that had been lit in Alabama had also caught fire in England. As we fight for workers' rights and social justice today, we must always remember our brothers and sisters who share our fight across the globe. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Oh, great. Here comes a new stealth attack on the fragile, life-sustaining natural resources of planet Earth. This assault is by Wall Street alchemists who are out to redefine one of our most basic resources, water. Everyone knows that water is invaluable. It's literally life, requiring a constant intake by each of us, or we quickly die. But the wizards of Wall Street want to reduce potable H2O from its environmental, humanitarian, and spiritual essence to just another perishable economic good that they can market price and sell to the highest bidder, literally turning our water into speculators' gold. This contrivance has opened the door for financial manipulators who've quietly been devising razzle-dazzle schemes to allow rich global investors to play in water. They're now pushing water futures, automated split-second trading, water-grabbing ventures, hedging schemes, and other financialization hustles to maneuver the monetary value of this essential resource. To see this ethically debased future, look to an outfit with the ominous acronym of WAM, Water Asset Management. It's buying up water rights in low-income farming communities in places like Arizona, then literally moving the commodity to rich suburban developments that will pay more. WAM profiteers call water peddling a $1 trillion market opportunity. They even boast that the devastation caused by climate change creates a market volatility that will provide an unprecedented period of transformation and investment opportunity for the water industry. This is Jim Hightower saying, let's begin to force a public discussion about this crucial question of environmental and existential ethics. Is access to an affordable supply of clean water to be a human right for all, or will we let it become a wet dream for a cabal of rich speculators? The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, last night's big speech caught, I think, had a good audience. I think it was well received. 85% of the people who viewed it said they approved of it. That is fantastic. And like I said, I think it's a reset in moving us back to the days of old, like the era that my grandparents grew up in. I think that's not a bad thing. But one of the tweets that caught my attention was written by a guy named David Kusnet. He was a former speechwriter for Bill Clinton, also for Walter Mondale and Mike Dukakis. He tweeted out, every Democratic president from Jimmy Carter to Joe Biden started out with an initiative to restore workers' rights to organize. But Joe Biden is the first to include workers' rights in a joint session speech. And I would argue to this point already, in my view, Joe Biden's already done more for the labor movement than all of the other ones just because he fired Peter Robb on day one. That's That's a big part of this. But here to share some thoughts on the tweet, on the speech, and maybe where we go from here, I've asked David Kusnet to come talk with us. Like I said, former speechwriter, author, fantastic book that I think is great. Love the work, hate the job. We'll talk about that a little bit too. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So you're, as a former speechwriter, as a guy who this is your deal. Take it apart for me. What'd you think?
Well, I thought it was a great speech, and I think the real test of a speech isn't just if it's a good speech in the abstract, but if it's a good speech for the person who's giving it. A good speech should be the best possible voice of the person who's giving it, not having everybody sound like John F. Kennedy or Cicero or Demosthenes or something, but sound like their own best voice. And I think that was Joe Biden's best voice. And it was, I think on the one hand, I think it was very plain spoken. It was very simple American language, like what Harry Truman or Gerald Ford might have said. But it was also very eloquent. It was as eloquent, I think, in its own way as John Kennedy or Franklin Roosevelt or Barack Obama, because it was his own voice. And it was him talking not just in his own voice, but talking about the real experience of real Americans whom he's met, a lot of whom are workers and union members. I think it's the first time that a president got up and talked about and quoted a nurse, talked about teachers getting vaccinated, talked about school bus drivers getting vaccinated, talked about school lunch workers getting vaccinated, gave a shout out not just to electrical workers, but gave a shout out by name to the IBEW. So he was talking about everyday Americans' experience, but he was doing it with a kind of lift that came from some heartfelt identification with their daily struggles.
Yeah, I look at the reaction from some on the left, and I had to remember back to during the primary when Biden won South Carolina, and a lot of my left friends were crying in their almond milk that he's not going to be progressive enough, he's not going to be visionary enough, he's not going to do enough to move the country. And I think surprisingly, I think a lot of those people today are going, hey, he's risen to the moment.
I think that's right. I think he really is. I mean, it sounds almost like a cliche, but he's the man for this moment, in the sense that he's not threatening. He knows his way around. He doesn't look like someone who's a bomb thrower, but he's really more progressive than any president in what he's actually trying to do than any president since Lyndon Johnson or FDR. He's the first president since FDR, even before last night's speech, to specifically endorse workers' rights to organize and form unions and bargain with their employers. Like Roosevelt legendarily did, that was before a long time, but he legendarily did that when he said that if he was a worker, he would join a union. And Joe Biden said the same thing during the Amazon campaign, which he must have known was a very uphill against the odds effort. And I think that's a good measure of what kind of person he is and what kind of president he is.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of memorable lines in it, and he hits the same one a lot that I think is important to hit on. That workers built the middle class, built the country, and the middle class was built by unions.
That's right. And I think part of what is so good about his speeches as president is he's echoing what he said during the campaign. I think he used that line very early when he was running for president in the primaries, and people probably figured anyone's running for president in a Democratic primary, they're going to say they're pro-union. But then he was the first president in history to say the same thing at a joint session of the United States Congress. And I think whether it's Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama or my old boss, Bill Clinton, who made a point of telling us that he wanted to refer back as president to what he had talked about in the campaign. If you sound the same notes, if you say some of the same things as president in the U.S. Capitol that you said in a living room in Iowa, people think you're for real.
No, and I'm glad he's done that. Because look, I voted for Bill Clinton for the sole reason he was going to bring strike replacement to happen. that didn't happen. I voted for Barack Obama because he shook my hand twice, told me we were going to get something better than the Employee Free Choice Act. We got none of that stuff. And I remember, as a kid, during the Carter years, they were talking about doing some half repeal of Taft-Hartley that didn't get done. But here we are in this moment, and you're someone who's been around labor for a while and politics for a while. It's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to run on it. Now, as you've pointed out, in the office, he's still talking about it. But what are the chances of actually getting this through? Because ultimately, rhetoric one thing, talking about it another, but actually getting something through on this, something completely different. What do you think the chances of getting anything done?
I think this time the administration and the labor movement and progressives around the country are really making a fight of it. I think they were all, the presidents you mentioned were all good presidents and they all meant well. But I think some of what was done was pro forma, that they never really pulled out the stops. You look at some of the presidents you mentioned, and you look at how senators and House members from their own home states voted on some of these issues, and they didn't vote right. And you just had the sense this was not an issue where previous Democratic presidents were pulling out the stops. And you can't really blame them, because for them to pull out the stops, the labor movement has to pull out the stops, and its allies have to pull out the stops. And rank and file people around the country, union members and non-members and progressives have to say this matters to us. I think that's going on now, even with the limits of the pandemic and what remains of social distancing and the emphasis on digital organizing rather than in-person, door-to-door organizing. But I think it's really, you look at just the way that people are putting pressure on the senators from the Democratic senator from West Virginia, on the Democratic senators from Virginia, just go state by state. There's a real effort going on there.
Well, because there's a lot of us who view this is almost the end of the rope.
That's right.
If something doesn't break soon, there's going to be nothing left to save on the other side. Because in the private sector, we're almost at the union density in this country that it was when it was illegal to be a union member.
That's right.
And people were meeting under the railroad bridge at midnight to hold their meetings. We're at that kind of desperate moment. That's
right. I mean, it's what's it, 6% or something in the private like that?
6.2%, something like that.
That's incredible.
Now, this is one of those moments that, again, we want to talk about the actions of old, and you've actually written a book, Love the Work, Hate the Job, about the Boeing strike in 2000, of which, we had covered a good portion of that. I think 2008 when they went on strike again under the No Nerds, No Birds banner.
That's right. I think they used that slogan first in 2000.
Okay, so I remember it in 2008.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was a great slogan.
It was a great slogan. Ray Goforth and the folks over at SPIA did a great job of getting that out. But again, it just shows that those kind of fights of the past we're kind of memorializing. But those are the fights of the future. We've got to remember what they were and figure out how we refight the battles of yesteryear almost.
The Boeing engineers strike is really a piece of history that needs to be remembered much more than it is. I think it was and still is the largest strike by professional and technical workers in the private sector at any time in American history. Boeing then was the nation's leading manufacturing exporter. It was what I think Bob Reich calls a national champion. It was like one of the most respected companies in the country, and to the extent that the trade deficit wasn't even worse than it is, it was because of Boeing. And they blew the whistle in their own way on a lot of the problems that have happened at Boeing since then. They, understandably, they didn't want to come out and say the planes aren't safe, but they talked about cutting corners on quality, cutting corners on tests, cutting corners on respect for the engineers and technicians and listening to them. And if someone goes back to what the engineers and technicians were saying in 2000, it's like a prophecy of everything that has happened at Boeing since then.
No, and this is where I come back to, as a union guy, that every working person should have the empowerment that comes with a union, the ability to speak out, because it ultimately, and I would argue, it ultimately saves the company by having employees who are empowered to say, no, I'm not going to do something stupid or illegal, or I'm not going to cut a corner. I think that there's that check and balance that comes with it that I think is really important.
That's exactly right. I mean, they had many great lines. The "No nerds, no birds" was a great line. Another great line that they had was they said, "We're going to cooperate with Boeing whether they want to or not." Because they had the best line of all. I'm sorry for forgetting it. They had the best line of all. They had a picket sign which said, "On strike for Boeing," meaning that they can, that the workers considered themselves to be Boeing, not the large shareholders and not the top executives, but the people who designed and did the blueprints and built the planes were Boeing, and they were concerned about, with good reason, as it turned out, about what was happening with Boeing.
Yeah, and now you've got the company that's kind of split between coasts, and now they're a half unionized. It's a mess. And again, this is one of those times that organizing has to happen to bring some say back to this. And I think the reason I bring that up is, we're moving into this era of we've been moved in this era where people view themselves as professionals, and unions are seen as, well, for those dirty coal miners and those dirty, steel workers and the truck drivers. That's what unions are for. And you go, no, it's for engineers. It's for the workers at Microsoft or Google or Alphabet or any of these tech workers, because you hear the horror stories that come out from them. And I think we lose a lot of the stories from those folks, but they're treated just as poorly.
Exactly. I mean, if there's, I hate to say if there's any silver lining in the current condition of where the labor movement, finds itself, no fault of its own, but there's a revival, especially or even like new activity among a new generation of professional and technical and IT workers. That there's, I think there may, even if you factor in the public sector, there may be a higher percentage of union density in professional and technical jobs, certainly if you include teachers and nurses, than in some, production jobs.
No, it's true. And
that's the good news. The bad news is unions should be for everybody who needs a voice and a raise, not to,
No, I'm with you. And the thing is, I look at today, Marty Walsh, the new labor secretary, who I like a lot, came out and talked about gig employees. And sadly, what's happened, especially to professionals, is they've been pushed into this world of, now you're a gig employee. You're no longer an employee, so you can't unionize, but you're your own boss now. And they're talking about, within the next couple of years, upwards of half of all jobs being gig kind of jobs. This is a battle that has to be fought now before it gets even further out of hand.
That's another thing that, I mean, it's been a long time coming, a long time brewing. I Love the Work, Hate the Job came out in 2008. It was about an events in and around Seattle, Washington in 2000, the first year of the new millennium. And that was back when people talked about a new economy and talked about Seattle as being the gateway to the new economy. And the point I tried to make was that if that's the new economy, we got some trouble, folks, because workers in Seattle and in the new and high-scale, high-tech sectors. I wrote about Boeing, Microsoft, nurses and hospitals there, and there's a kind of a comparison with what the workplace used to be at its best. Now, understanding that's a terribly difficult job, but they had a very humane boss. I wrote about the Kaiser Aluminum Company, which had been founded by Henry Kaiser, who was sort of the model of the enlightened progressive capitalist of the mid-20th century, and what happened to that company after he died and his heirs lost control over it. And there was a lockout. But anyhow, I'm being a little long-winded, but anyhow, in Microsoft during the 1990s, that was sort of a preview of what's happened to tech workers elsewhere.
Right.
Out of 20, I think the figure was out of 20,000 tech workers at Microsoft in the Seattle area in the 90s, 6,000 of them were temp workers. But they weren't really temp workers. I mean, they weren't like hired for 3 months and then let go and they go off and join a grunge band to write a novel. go to law school or medical school, they kept on being rehired as temp workers.
Yeah, they were full-time
And they were
temporary.
paid by what they called employment agencies, staffing agencies, rather than by Microsoft. And they called themselves the permatemps because they were, permanent temporary workers. And they founded an organization called WashTech, Washington Alliance of Technology Workers, with CWA. And the bad news was it was a very difficult group to organize, and as Amazon threatened to do if they in a few places where they won a unit, and Microsoft just shut down the unit. The good news was they got a lot of visibility for their issues. They got a core of people who are still active in unionism today, and they changed a lot of the conditions through the Washington state legislature for the temporary workers. So while things aren't great now, they're better than they were.
Yeah.
And that's sort of both a forerunner and a kind of a model for the condition of tech and temporary workers today, and for how they can
Something's got to happen. Now,
themselves.
I lived through the era of the 90s and the 2000s when you had all these temp agencies and these third-party logistics companies who, if you tried to organize, they just fired them and brought in another one. We definitely have to do something, and soon, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the administration does. Before I let you go, I got to get your thoughts on, you co-authored a book, America Needs a Raise, with John Sweeney, who just passed here in the not too distant past. I wanted to get your thoughts on Sweeney and his legacy.
I really think he was both a good man and a great man. And part of his goodness and greatness was I've never worked with anybody at that level of influence in society who had less ego and less affect about himself than John Sweeney. He was just about getting things done. The old saying that's a cliche with most people is really true with him, that he didn't care who got the credit, much less if he got the credit, as long as things got done. And I think his legacy is at least as much the Service Employees Union, SEIU, as it is the AFL-CIO, because at SEIU, he really was able to take a long-standing, very decentralized, very uneven union and turn it into a very effective organizing union, and a union that just reached out to everyone who had been overlooked and underpaid in society: immigrants, women, communities of color, people in low-wage service jobs, janitors, hospital workers.
Yeah. I agree. His legacy.
That's really his legacy.
Yeah, I agree. His legacy really was SEIU, not the AFL, because I think the AFL has been a mess for a very long time. And we'll see where that takes us. But again, it's been the decline of the movement as a whole because
That's
of
right.
how bad our labor laws have been allowed to be slashed and burned, and the ossification of bad decision after bad decision.
Could I just tell one John Sweeney story?
Sure.
Which didn't even make it into I don't think it made it into his obituary. So it was in the book. His first job, he told the story on himself, and it's just about, just the interaction of the old economy and a new economy that wasn't going to come around for decades after the story about him. His first job after college was working for IBM. And he was a research economist for IBM. And they asked him, they had everyone who went to work for them as an economist had to do some kind of, almost academic kind of study. And they asked him to, and this is in the early 1950s, they asked him, mid-1950s, to investigate the possibility of building a small computer, whether there would be a market for such a thing. At that time, computers took up a whole room, and they did a fraction of what your cell phone can do now. And Sweeney dutifully, as he told the story himself, he dutifully went out and investigated it. And he came back and he said he really didn't see that happening. About the only thing he thought it could do was maybe do payrolls for smaller companies. And shortly after that, he went to work for the old Ladies Garment Workers Union, and then for SEIU. That was John Sweeney's brush with corporate America. But he could have been Steve Jobs.
Could have been. But he didn't think the small computer was going to amount to much. I don't know that he'd have been Steve Jobs.
In fairness, no one else did back then either.
That's true. Good point. But David, it was great talking with you. I appreciate you taking some time and sharing some of your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you.
Good
Take
stuff.
care.
David Kusnet. Make sure you check out his work, davidkusnet.net. ricksmith.com, the website. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day 8,000 UAW workers at the Chalmers plant in Milwaukee voted overwhelmingly to walk off the job. Close to 12,000 production and maintenance workers were on strike across the country. Workers rode the post-war strike wave as whole industries moved to peacetime reconversion. Historian Eric Slocum notes that UAW Local 248 had a historically militant left-wing leadership, was known for its support to housing desegregation campaigns in the city, and was a central driving force of Milwaukee's CIO Council. They had built a strong shop steward and grievance structure at Chalmers and were sure victory was certain. Local President Robert Busey insisted wage increases were not at issue, but rather unresolved issues remained to be settled now that the war was finally over. Key points of contention were the company's demands to eliminate maintenance of membership agreements that guaranteed the closed shop and union dues. The company also wanted to stop paying stewards for the time involved in grievance procedures. The Chalmers strike was a harbinger of things to come. Historian Martin Halpern states that the company officials played a significant role in the crafting of Taft-Hartley legislation as the strike unfolded. Chalmers was on a union-busting campaign and made no small effort to red-bait union leaders for months in local newspapers. By the fall, workers at the smaller plants had returned to work, but the Milwaukee local stood firm. Area CIO workers joined picket lines in support, only to be brutalized and arrested. The House Un-American Activities Committee arrived in town to investigate the strike, and the company instigated a vigorous back-to-work campaign. After 11 months, the strike was called off with no contract and 91 union leaders fired.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, the reality is I hope there is what a lot of people think, that there's going to be an uprising of working people saying enough already. And, I've been talking about this for a while, the idea that we negotiate everything in our daily life. We negotiate with our spouses, we negotiate with the kids, we negotiate with the person at the stop sign. I got here first, you got here first. No, you go. No, we're always in a constant state of negotiation, trying to just make it through the day. Yet the only place that we don't do that is in the workplace. And I think people, especially the younger generation, they're not going to take it or leave it. They're going to want to make it better. And I think this is a good time. I think the pandemic has opened some eyes. At least I hope. I think the fact that we've had an economy that has created, a handful of extraordinarily wealthy people, while we still can't figure out how to get kids through college without massive debt. And the dropout rates, because of inability to pay, are just astronomical. And they're talking about here in Pennsylvania where I'm at, cutting down the number of state universities because enrollment has dropped. And you go, that's insane. It's insane that you'd be cutting the number of universities as the population of the country continues to grow, and as the need for an educated workforce is even more important. These schools are closed down because people don't have the money. And now they're people are reevaluating. Is it worth going to college, taking on this enormous expense, and there being no job on the other side? This is where, as policymakers, this is where, as taxpayers and citizens, we've got to be looking towards towards the people in elected office to go, hey, how do we return to a world where, people get to go to get the skills that they need to get the jobs that are coming around, and not be just massively in debt. And now look, I know people are going to say, well, my generation, we had to do it. And I've said it too. The reason I dropped out of college the second time around was I didn't have the money. It was one of those things where I had the money and no time, or I had time and no money. And you shouldn't have to make that choice. There shouldn't be that kind of desperation. Now, my story was a little bit different. I was basically on my own at 18. My grandfather did probably the best thing he could have done for me, and said, "There's the door. Good luck. Call your grandmother every once in a while." Made me grow up really quickly. Made me take responsibility very, very quickly. And as much as I wanted to go back to school, I just didn't have the money. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I graduated from college. And, it's one of those things that it was one of those things I always wanted to do. Because it was something my mother always wanted. But I go back to those days when I didn't have the money. And it was it's insane. And I took on student loans to go for the years that I went, that I had to then pay back without a degree. It shouldn't be this difficult. It should not be this difficult for families to be able to navigate the waters, to get their kids through school and get them opportunities. It just shouldn't be that difficult. And I look back to it, and you have people go, well, you made it through. Yeah, I made it through because there were still good, solid working class jobs available. There were good, solid union jobs available, and there were a number of them when I started. Those jobs are getting fewer and farther between, and harder for people to get, and they aren't paying what they were 30 years ago. Which is why we need to see a growth in the labor movement. We need to see a growth in the number of jobs that are out there. And we need people who are going to push policy that are going to make things easier and better for working class kids to go to college and to get an education. I think that's simple. Don't you? I think that's kind of what Joe Biden was talking about last night. Recreating that American dream and the foundation by which people can navigate those waters. That's why I think that it was a good speech. I think it would have been a great speech had he cut it about in half. It's just my view again. But I think it was spot on. It was the words that needed to be said. I'd like to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bob Ney, Talk Media News, going to be here to share some thoughts. Stick around. Right back after this.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The gap between what we are doing and what actually needs to be done is widening by the second.
New climate targets still not enough to close the emissions gap. Republicans' infrastructure proposal about 1/5 the size of Biden's. Plus,
say goodbye to your burgers. In order to help hit the Biden administration's climate goals, a limit of 4 pounds of red meat per year, or a single average-sized burger every month.
Fox News forced to admit Biden's climate plans do not ban red meat.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
A graphic and a script incorrectly implied that it was part of Biden's plan for dealing with climate change. That is not the case.
The Green News Report would like to apologize. We referred to Fox News as news. That is not the case. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, so Fox News spent all weekend long freaking out about Joe Biden canceling meat.
With maximal outrage.
And it turns out it's not true at all.
Nope.
Who could have guessed it?
But we'll have more on that in a moment. So, jobs and clean energy were the central focus of President Joe Biden's two-day virtual climate summit last week, attended by some 40 world leaders, business executives, labor union heads. Biden pledged to cut U.S. emissions 50% by 2030 under the Paris Climate Agreement and reach net zero emissions by 2050, calling climate action an unprecedented opportunity to create millions of jobs transitioning to clean energy.
And canceling meat.
No. Scientists say it's achievable with existing technology, but it'll be a very heavy lift. A new report by Europe's Climate Action Tracker calculates that even with the new, more ambitious pledges announced by the United States and other countries, it is still not enough to meet the Paris targets. And the world is way off track to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050 to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, unless countries pick up the pace of emissions cuts.
Uh-oh. Or if they cancel meat.
A different study from the European Commission's Joint Research Center finds that there's also a huge discrepancy between what the world's nations say they emit in greenhouse gases each year versus the amount of emissions that independent organizations have calculated using independent models. The gap is roughly equal to the annual emissions of the United States.
Uh-oh.
The researchers warn that the accounting discrepancy will complicate the already difficult task of pinpointing just how much and how fast nations must cut greenhouse gas pollution. Here in the U.S., congressional Republicans unveiled their own infrastructure counter-proposal to Biden's American Jobs Plan. Biden proposes to spend $2.2 trillion over 10 years repairing the nation's infrastructure, upgrading for climate impacts, and shifting to cleaner, safer, renewable energy. Republicans' infrastructure proposal is about one-fifth of that, a little over $560 billion.
And I'm guessing there's nothing in it at all about the climate.
Nope.
But they protect burgers, I hope.
Right-wing media began lying about Biden's climate proposals right off the bat, and it demonstrates the right-wing propaganda cycle. They highlighted a year-old, totally unrelated study that suggests that one way to help reduce emissions would be reducing consumption of red meat. The UK's Daily Mail then baselessly speculated that Biden would ban red meat, and then Fox News and right-wing media ran with that lie so Republicans could denounce the imaginary policy. Fox News did not retract that story for 3 days.
Well, you have to have something to be angry about if you're Fox News or Republican.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is moving quickly. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Transportation Department have both rescinded a Trump-era attempt to strip the state of California of its special authority to set its own vehicle tailpipe emissions and pollution standards. Both agencies announced Monday they will restore California's right to set climate limits on cars and SUVs, which many car makers, like General Motors, have already announced that they're going to shift to all-electric vehicles by 2035.
Oh, how nice of them. Instead of Republicans trying to use big government to leverage against small states, the Biden administration is actually letting states do what they please when it comes to limiting carbon emissions.
Finally, Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg testified to the House Oversight Committee on Earth Day. With her characteristic bluntness, Thunberg correctly criticized the pledges made by countries so far as insufficient and delivered a stark warning to those who would delay action.
You still have time to do the right thing and to save your legacies. But that window of time is not going to last for long. We, the young people, are the ones who are going to write about you in the history books. We are the ones who get to decide how you will be remembered. So my advice for you is to choose wisely.
Oh, man. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Choose wisely. This has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Greta. Yeah. See, you seem to think that these soulless people have any concern about their legacy. I wish they did. And look, I love that twist from Greta Thunberg there. We're the ones who are going to write about you when you're dead. So do the right thing. I kind of like that. Good on her. Good on her. So here to share some thoughts on the big speech last night, talk a little bit about where we go from here, the first 100 days and beyond. I've asked our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick. It's always the famous 100 days, isn't it?
Yep, the 100 days and going back and doing the scoring.
Right. Now Biden and everybody else. It's always a big judgment call in the first 100 days, and people have asked me, I know in the last 3 weeks, well, don't you think Biden is doing, as president's just doing too much of this and too much of that? And I said, well, you've got the first 100 days, and he wants to put an agenda in, and then you see the rest of the year how you make it work. You kind of throw it out there the first 100 days.
Yep. Now, the people who keep score on the promises made during the campaign, of which they say there were 61 promises, they say he has already kept 26 of them. 32 more have been partially kept, and only 3 of the promises that he made during the campaign he hasn't started. So to highlight your point, the vast majority of what he ran on, he's already touching.
Right, and yeah, because that was the question, of course, today, of the promises he's made. He had, the 200 million shots, right? That was a biggie. They had the reopen schools. He had promised, to do that from the federal level. And then the mask mandate. I'm trying to remember, too. Oh, the relief package, of course. That's, number one, and really big aspect of it. And then he's got the reversing the Trump tax cuts, and that's not done, but it's in
the works.
Progress, yeah. And then environmental actions, the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Climate Accord, the XL permit, which that's kind of controversial, but he still did it. The troops from Afghanistan, which with interest I saw where Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton were kind of in sync, saying, don't do this too fast. Well, he's taking till September, so I kind of thought that was, interesting. Oh, we rejoined the World Health Organization. That is a biggie. And then citizenship through executive orders he has accomplished. So most of everything I just, spouted off about here and a list of things was done without actually congressional action, except for the stimulus package. So he was able to do it through executive orders or through the government itself.
Yeah, he got the easy stuff done, the stuff that he could sign off with a pen. Now it's the heavy lifting. It's
right.
It's getting some work done. But today you got a water infrastructure bill pushed through 89-2 through the Senate. Pretty surprised with that.
That's pretty good. I mean, right after State of the Union, maybe it's a honeymoon period, and they can do a few other things. See where it goes.
Yeah. And now today, I understand the White House has unveiled an aid package to India. We're going to send some oxygen. We're going to send some masks. We're going to send some material to help them. I guess $100 million in aid and a bunch of supplies. 20 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. 1 million rapid diagnostic tests. As much this Remdesivir as we can give them. This is a start, right?
Right, and basically we're also returning a favor for what they did for us, last year when we needed some help and some medicine, and they had sent it from India. And I think the biggest thing this does, though, with what the president's doing is it's going to activate other nations, to help. And again, any nation that's lagging behind, like India or Africa, we can sit there and say, well, the prime minister should have done this and they should have done that. The bottom line remains a lot of these countries that are third world need help, and the world's going to have to help them because we're all in this together.
Yep.
You can't have all of us better, and then it still lags behind anywhere else in the world.
And this again gives us the ability to reassert our position in the world that I think we've for 4 years let go void, because I don't want China being the one to fill that void.
And they will. I mean, they have consistently done that where we have failed or not wanted to act, or we've been very protectionist, internally here with issues, and China, tends to always step in. And I think you make a great point, Rick. It is a leadership that we're re-engaging throughout the world. And I don't think you're going to see, seriously, this week, the ability of anybody, from the right of the right of the right to step in and say, well, he's hurting Americans. He's reached his goal in continuing when it comes to the supplies we need, so therefore we can share. And I think he will have very, very little criticism.
No, and there should be no criticism here because we've got enough. We've got enough. I've heard no stories of people saying I can't get it. We're now moving. Everybody should be able to get vaccinated. And in fact, we're in the position where I saw today New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said by July 1st, New York City is going to be wide open. It's going to be back to the way it was before the pandemic, or at least that's what he seems to believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with caution we will begin to go back to certain things, and with caution throughout the summer. And if more people are vaccinated, then it should maybe not be completely normal, but it'll be fairly normal compared to what we've had.
Some good news: the economy bouncing back, and again, I think this has a lot to do with the rescue plan. Has a lot to do with confidence. Has a lot to do with things just kind of slowly getting back to some bit of normalcy, but 6.4% rebound in the economy in the first quarter of the year. I think that's pretty impressive. No.
Well, it is, and I think what we're going to see is a great growth. The predictions for 2021 of the gross domestic product, which is our measure of goods and services, as you say, it's going to be up. And as long as that happens, and as long as people are returning to the job market, I think it's going to be it's going to be a great thing. Housing is on fire. I do flip houses, and my house that I put up on the market was up for 2 hours.
Wow!
Before 2 hours, and I was given $10,000 over what I asked for the house. So I think, obviously the housing, because of low interest rates, is continuing to boom. Now, of course, the contractors can come in and can overbuild, don't get me wrong, but I think in general the housing market's very, very strong. And you've seen Janet Yellen, who is our treasurer, of course, has made some statements which are tending to go towards keeping those interest rates low at this period of time. Not that she can control it, but her voice obviously is important in the process.
Right. You sold it in 2 hours. Why didn't you wait 4?
Well, actually, I kept it open as I promised for 3 days. When I say I sold it in 2 hours, 2 hours after I put it up is the offer that I eventually took. I took, but I kept it open, and I ended up with 9 offers on it. Wow. So it was the best one when I rated what type of loan and type of terms and things like that. Now the problem, in fact, if anybody out there that's listening is doing flipping, they know, try to find a house. That's the problem. They're tough to find.
No, they are. Trust me, we're just in the process of buying my daughter a house, and right now the stock is low, which is surprising to me. And when something does pop up on the market, it goes really quickly.
Right. When my house went up on the market in Little Newark, Ohio, I was one of 4 new houses, 4 in an area of 58,000 people.
No, look, I don't think people are selling because they, like you said, you're going to have to go and buy. So, you might get a lot for what you have, but then you got to go out and find something else.
Exactly. But the good news is the housing market is going pretty strong. A lot of the moratorium was placed into effect by the Biden administration. That helped a lot for people to be able to stay in their apartments. So overall, I think with the potential crisis that could have been out of there, can you imagine if people could have just been evicted everywhere?
Yeah.
I think the policies helped through a bad pandemic.
No, I mean, what happens when the moratorium slows down, goes away, and people are still going to be behind on their mortgages? Because I'm reading reports out there. There are still millions of people who are still behind. The $1,400 helped, but if you didn't have a paycheck for 6 months and you didn't pay your rent for 4 or 6 months or your mortgage, you're behind. what happens to those folks?
Well, that's right. I mean, they have to be careful because when the moratorium happened, you still pay portions of rent, or when it expires, of course, then you have the problem of what do you do. And I would think at some point in time, somebody's going to craft an executive order that graduates payment in. In other words, yeah, I understand the landlord has to have payment, but they could graduate in that you are lifting the moratorium, but effectively you're saying stagger in with normal payments people are making for rent, stagger in back rent over a period of time that works for the person to be able to keep, the apartment they have. Yeah, something like that may be a brainchild of the administration that would at least help, to bridge the gap.
Yeah, because one of the things I'm worried about is, here we get down the road a little bit. And we've bought this house at what I think is a pretty high point, and then you're going to have a whole bunch of foreclosures, and the market's just going to collapse around it.
Well, I mean, that's potentially possible, and then I think there's another aspect we have to look at. Again, you get a lot of landlords saying, "Well, wait a minute, I have to eat too and pay bills," and that's understandable, except they were receiving their rent payments, right? And then the people, through some of them, through federal subsidy programs, through, the programs that were instituted through the stimulus. So those landlords got taxpayers' money to, keep things going, or they got loans that are going to be forgiven because they're self-employed entities. And I think that's got to be taken in consideration. You just can't take that money and then say, well, now I'm going to throw you out.
Yeah, no, I hope that to be the case.
I hope.
Also wanted to get your thoughts on, evidently there was an energy attack near the White House. What was that about? Do you know?
Energy attack?
Yeah, it says the U.S. reportedly investigating a potential energy attack. National Security Council reportedly, near the south side of the White House in November of 2020. Evidently there was some kind of energy attack.
That must be an attack similar to what happened down in the embassy in Cuba.
Yes.
Because that sounds exactly like what the mysterious attack down there that caused then some problems within, with people in their brains down there. It sounds like the same very thing that happened overseas in Cuba.
Yeah, it's saying people are left with debilitating symptoms, and the reason I ask is I have a friend whose father's having some issues, and I'm going, is it possible that this is part of all that? I thought maybe you'd have some thoughts.
No, the only thing I can say that at first when this happened down in Cuba, this very same type of thing, they're kind of pinpointed. They're not in general all over the city. They're in specific areas like they were in the embassy in our mission at that time in Cuba, and they at first thought it was a mass hysteria. One person has something and the rest assume or imagine they have, but it wasn't that. I mean, it was tested and proven that something, they don't know what, caused these really bad debilitating symptoms in a lot of people's situations down there. This might be the very same thing.
Yeah, something like a microwave attack is what
right.
they were saying.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Which things are getting crazier
these days. It's easy to imagine that it can be done. And again, if it's just a certain energy attack near the White House only, it wasn't citywide, so it was something obviously that was aimed at a certain place. Mm-hmm.
Finally, I wanted to get your thoughts again on any new information on Rudy and the seizures of electronic devices from his apartment and his office. Now, especially that you've got this ex-lawmaker from Ukraine speaking out, or evidently speaking to the FBI.
Yes, and did you happen to see Rudy's son by chance?
I didn't.
No. Oh, okay. Well, later on, you have to look this one up. He came out to the crowd all of a sudden, and then he proceeded to talk, which was not impressive, and then he proceeded to blame, this was the great thing he said, they took everything from my father's office, but the one thing that would incriminate the president's son, not Trump, President Biden, the president's son, Hunter Biden, this is the one thing. They didn't take that, and then he left. It was just quite amazing. But Rudy Giuliani is going to argue now, and this is very interesting because we have to remember Cohen, the president's lawyer, President Trump's lawyer, argued this. He's going to argue, of course, privilege. He's the president's attorney. He was working for the president on this. Well, the fact remains that, first of all, he wasn't a White House employee. Two, he was the president's attorney, but was the president asking him to work on issues with the Ukraine and dirt on the Bidens? Is that an official function for the attorney? Cohen tried in court to get his, subpoenaed records. He tried to get them thrown out, and they were only narrowly released on a certain narrow portion of what he asked. So I think if you look at that precedence, because he was the president's attorney, Cohen was, Rudy Giuliani is not going to be successful in federal court of getting all of those documents thrown out. He may have some narrow issues in there, but just as Cohen, he's not going to be successful in hiding behind the fact that he was, quote, the president's attorney, because, again, how could he be the president's attorney on dealing with Ukraine partners and dealing with information from the Ukraine on a political campaign?
Yeah.
That's not White House privilege.
No, it's not. And
correct.
My mind keeps going to the idea that, client-attorney privilege only matters if you're not part of the crime.
Well, that's the other thing. You hit the nail on the head. If Donald Trump had sat down and told Rudy Giuliani some information about personal knowledge he had with the Ukraine, with Biden, etc., that's one issue. But when it's the lawyer themselves doing it, then you don't say, well, I can't be looked at because I did it for my client. That's not the client telling the attorney something. That's the attorney acting on his own, nefariously. I don't see where, Rick, he wins this in a broad basis to have the information thrown out. And if he doesn't win that in a broad basis, I think he's in trouble.
Yeah, I don't either. And now I was wondering why I saw Chris Farley trending on Twitter. And it was the clip of him playing Giuliani's son during one of the campaigns. That was so funny.
Oh, you'll get a charge out of the. He just kind of appeared out of nowhere, spouted off a little bit, and said they should have got the one thing, the crime, the information on the president's son, and then he left.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing it. That's pretty funny.
Right.
I did want to bring up one thing. We have a listener who sent a video of you talking with the Young Turks back in 2016 about Bernie Sanders.
Oh, yes.
And wanted to hear your thoughts on Bernie. So,
right.
Real quick, you got a thought on Bernie?
Well, sure. In fact, that clip made them some money. It went fairly viral. I think 150,000 some. I was at the convention, Democratic convention, and they asked me about Trump versus Clinton, and I said, there's some hesitation. They said, Sanders. I said, sure, that's a given. And they felt that, they seized on it to say that Sanders would have been a clearer choice. And the reason I said that Sanders was a clearer choice, and my friends have scoffed at me on this, but Sanders and Trump were basically, let's say, fairly identical on trade, all right? Hillary wasn't. She was suspicioned by a lot of people that she would make these trades the gold standard, and that she would not support working people. And the bottom line is, I argue that, yes, Bernie might have been, quote, to the left, as people say, but how would Bernie Sanders, let me ask this, have done in Pennsylvania against Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania with working people against Donald Trump?
No, I think in 2016 Bernie would have won.
That was exactly what I said, and that clip got a lot of hits because that's what I said. It was pretty clear-cut on Bernie Sanders, but not clear-cut on Hillary versus Donald Trump, who I and other people would support.
Yeah. No, I think in 16, Sanders would have won. I think he'd have gotten crushed in 20.
Yes, true. That's true.
That's just
different
my thoughts.
Time.
And I'm a Sanders guy. I still was going to vote for him. But I, in looking at it, that's how I saw it. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because somebody threw that clip out, and a big fan of yours. So just wanted to throw that out. But as always, I appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
our good friend Bob Ney. I think, and I don't like that. I don't like the fact that that Bernie would have lost in 2020. I think, but I just think that's the way it was. And this is, judging, from the speech last night, I'm not upset with who the American people chose to be president. And for my Republican listeners who are still saying that they cheated, still no proof. And I guess there are no more court challenges. You've lost all of those in what are fairly packed Republican courts. So there that goes. The speech again, is I think is a good starting point forward. From this point forward, it's about jobs. The fact that the president brought up jobs 46 times. I think that's an indication of where the mindset is going to go, and where we're going to be spending the coming weeks talking about how we rebuild our economy. Lots of stuff to get to. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com.